You are watching Xirtus.
This is a fun one for me, I think, because you got the Answer 42 and the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Everything comes down to mice, it seems like. But you're not allowed to do these studies we talked earlier because of gatekeeping and experimentation. Humans, in general, you're not experimenting on humans, right? You have to do this with animals. So what's the deal with the RMR study? What are you doing with mice?
Yeah, well, we're being very careful not to use white mice, which were the mice in the Hitchhiker's Guide. We
You don't
are
want to upset the yeah.
right. Um, um, no, we're using a strain that's been used in the large majority of lifespan studies over many decades. It's called C57 Black 6. These are mice that live normally to about 2.5 years. And what we'd like to do is figure out ways to extend their lives, of course, their healthy lives, and therefore, as a side effect, their total lives, by as much as we can, but only by starting late in life. So starting when they're already 18 months old, so 1 year away from their average lifespan. And if you do that, people have been trying to do that for a while, and the best that they've been able to achieve in terms of how much they were able to extend life when starting at that kind of age is about 4 months. So our goal is to get them out to an extra year rather than only an extra 4 months. So it's trebling the effect size, the impact of the interventions. And we are very sure that the only way that this is going to be possible is with a divide and conquer approach, essentially by giving these mice a whole bunch of things at the same time that address different aspects of aging, different aspects of the damage that the body does to itself throughout life. So our first experiment along these lines began early last year. It's not quite done. There's maybe a few dozen mice left out of the 1,000 mice we began with. But it's definitely validated our hypothesis that this is the right way. This is the right kind of experiment to do. I believe honestly that it is by some distance the most value for money type of experiment that can be done right now. Even though these are very expensive experiments. This experiment cost $3.5 million. Because 1,000 mice, right? And we're injecting them with cells and viral vectors and so on.
All kinds of stuff. Yeah.
So the ostensibly bad news is that we have not knocked it out of the park at the first attempt. We have only barely got to the kind of level that other people have got to with much simpler approaches. But I'm not complaining. We've learned a huge amount from this experiment. The only thing that's slowing us down right now is we don't have the money to do the next experiment. If I were given $100 million today, I would spend $90 million of it on experiments of this overall design, with different interventions combined, with the same interventions at different doses, things like that. And I'm very sure that would take us to this milestone of getting a year, which I've called robust mouse rejuvenation, pretty quickly. Now, why is that milestone so important? The fundamental answer is because it completely destroys any pretense that aging is some kind of thing that we can never manipulate properly with medicine, that we can only tinker around the edges. Even though there may still be a bunch of work, and I estimate a decade of work, to get from that point to the corresponding point in humans, which is what I've called longevity escape velocity. Nevertheless, that tinkering is going to be done in earnest. There will be a proper war on aging by the time triggered by getting as dramatic a result in mice as what we're going for. So that is my rationale for prioritizing these experiments with the small amount of money that I have been able to scrape together, and why I will want to spend as much more as possible.
Wow. So do you think that this study is going to lead to something that shows that it's a stack lifestyle, that we need certain things, multiple things that interact with each other? Is that kind of goal?
You could call it a stack, yeah. I mean, the whole idea that I put forward 24 years ago, the idea of damage repair being the way to go, being easier than slowing down the creation of damage, which is what everyone had been thinking about before, that whole idea is intrinsically a divide and conquer strategy. It says, well, okay, look, the human body is a machine, Therefore, its function is determined by its structure, and to the extent that we can restore an old body's structure to something like how it was in early adulthood, we will thereby extend healthy lifespan and therefore total lifespan. That's fine. But the fact is, because the human body is such a viciously complicated machine, it does itself an insane number of different types of damage. So the only reason that this ever became even slightly, practical was because when I put this idea forward first in 2000, I realized that we could classify those many, many types of damage into a relatively manageable number of categories, just 7 categories. And the classification was for the purpose of identifying and describing generic approaches to fixing those types of damage. So that's where we've been all this time, but it still means you've got a whole bunch of different treatments that you've got to develop to give to the same mice and then eventually the same humans at the same time. So yes, you can call it a stack.
I gotta ask you some questions about some of the bigger, more interesting treatments. But first, I think Janani, did you have some questions about this? I know you've been keen to ask him about the RMS.
Well, I wanted to point out that Aubrey has done something remarkable with regard to how scientific studies are usually communicated to the public, in that he has published these regular updates about once a month, sometimes a little more frequently, sometimes a little less frequently, but he has published them on social media to show how the experiment has been progressing thus far, and especially the survival curves comparing all 10 of the cohorts, the control cohort, then the cohorts that receive 1 treatment each, the cohorts that receive 3 of the 4 treatments each, and the cohort that receives all of the treatments for males and females, and what their survival has been across time. That has been very interesting to follow, and Aubrey has provided some detailed commentary, and I think this has really helped get the community engaged and get people to understand and be excited about this research, because all too often scientific studies, even very important ones that communicate valid insights, are published in journals, and then maybe 50 people read them. And yes, some of those readers are also experts in the field who can cite them and build upon them. But the vast majority of the public remains unaware of all of the excellent work that's being done. And I wonder, Aubrey, in the course of essentially preparing these updates and following the results of the RMR1 study, what are some insights that you can communicate that you've learned from this particular study, perhaps insights that you didn't anticipate, or perhaps the magnitude of results for certain cohorts surprising you in any particular way?
Yeah, okay, so let me actually address, first of all, what you said very nicely about the communication, and then answer the last part of your question. So on the communication side, yeah, I mean, it's been invaluable to me to be able to come out and actually give these interim reports every month or 2. And that's not true only in the sense of, it's helping to maintain enthusiasm and interest and so on in the wider world. It's also because actually the main thing about publication in the academic world is not so much that very few people read a paper. That's not always true. If the paper is high profile, it can be widely read by the general public. The problem is how long it takes to actually do it. The fact that one has to, keep things embargoed until the publication is out. And of course, the publication is only out after it's gone through all the peer review and all that. So it takes fucking forever. So, I mean, the way I've been able to avoid that is very straightforward. Namely, in academia, your average professor, he's got a team of people who are all looking for their next job. They're all PhD students and postdocs who are thinking about their careers, and therefore they've got to get credit. So publication priority is really key, even to the extent that it's not so key to the professor who's already tenured or whatever. People who work for me are not looking for their next job. That's absolutely critical. Furthermore, it's different from working in the private sector. If I were working in the private sector, I also couldn't do what I'm doing now in terms of putting these regular reports out, because you've got to worry about your bloody investors who want to protect the intellectual property and they want to get a return on investment in the fullness of time, which is perfectly fine, but it's the reason I didn't do that. A lot of people take pity on me for having had to take a lot of slings and arrows over the years, but the fact is I did it with my eyes entirely open. I chose the heretic's path in life, for a reason. So yeah, that's very important. So then to come back to the last part of your question, Gennady, what the results are saying to me now. Well, I want to be a bit cautious about this because there's a lot of things that results cannot say to me until the experiment is completely over. At this point, pretty much everything that we can say is extremely tentative. But I will say that overall, I'm not very surprised by anything. I certainly wasn't expecting that we would, hit it out of the park at the first attempt. I knew that there would be a whole bunch of reasons why that wouldn't happen. I did not know what those reasons would be. I didn't know which bits of the experiment would work and which bits would not work. However, I was hoping that most of the bits would work, and sure enough, that's what has happened. We are seeing, certainly in males, clear additivity of the interventions. We're seeing in females a slightly more disappointing result in a way, namely that the main benefits are being conferred by one treatment, namely rapamycin, which is not actually a damage repair treatment at all, and that the 3 damage repair treatments are not really adding all that much to that. But even that is, an oversimplification of what we're seeing. So I will want to, to say a lot more than that in due course. And then, looking at some of the other anomalies in the data, we've got cases where large numbers of animals die very suddenly over a period of like 2 weeks a few times. And we're going to have to do careful statistical analysis to ask whether, if we take into account the multiple hypotheses that we're testing, whether that really does fall outside of the bounds of statistical significance. But then, yeah, there's other cases where over the long term, things have gone weirdly, like, groups that have done worse than the controls, even though they were getting 3 out of the 4 treatments, and then they've caught up, over time. So pretty curious results that we've had. But this is what you expect with highly complex experiments like this. So we're learning a huge amount from this. We're also, I'll be honest, learning a lot about how to do such experiments. There have been a couple of ways in which we are having to conclude that we didn't do this or that thing quite as well as we could have done. And obviously next time we go, we will benefit from that knowledge, that learning. So, it's pretty much what I would have expected overall.